Well, good morning, everyone. Happy Monday morning to you. Welcome back to Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I'm the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. A little adjustment there, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, welcome back. I appreciate you being with me. Hope you had a fantastic weekend. We are continuing our discussion of the Olivet Discourse. Now, we have been spending an awful lot of time on Matthew chapter 25, 31 and following, and how it draws from the Old Covenant, how it controls and influences so much of the rest of the New Testament. Now, over the last week particularly, I shared with you some of the connections between Isaiah 40, Isaiah 62, and Matthew chapter 25. Now, part of what I'm going to present to you this week is going to be a little bit repetitious, but it's going to be kind of like the book of Revelation. It's going to be recapitulatory, but it's also going to add new, important information to drive home the fact that Matthew chapter 25 cannot be separated from the discussion of the end of the Old Covenant age, the coming of Christ at that time to establish the new covenant age. And so that's why this is so important. I've shared with you in the past how, in my upbringing as a young man, in the amillennial world in which I was raised, we believed and we taught, we defended in formal public debate the idea that God was through with the Old Covenant at the cross. God was through with Old Covenant Israel at the cross. Beginning on Pentecost, God established the church, and from then throughout the rest of the New Testament, all the way to maps, there is nothing there about God's fulfillment of, number one, the Old Covenant, because after all, it was nailed to the cross, we were told. And number two, nothing to do with God's fulfillment at the parousia of God's Old Covenant promises made to Israel. I can tell you this, in that fellowship, Romans chapter 11, 25 to 27 was feared, literally feared. I remember attending many lectureships, and in the Q&A session, if questions were asked about Romans 11, 25 to 27, in which Paul said, "Now, brethren, I would not have you to be ignorant concerning this mystery, that blindness in part has happened unto Israel until the times of the Gentiles is fulfilled." Until the fullness of the Gentiles is fulfilled, "For the Redeemer shall come out of Zion, for this is my covenant with them, when I take away their sin, says the Lord. All Israel shall be saved. This is my covenant with them." And my goodness, it was almost all out panic. Well, Israel there is not Israel of the Old Covenant. It's the church, so the church will be saved. I just don't really know what it teaches, but it doesn't teach what dispensationalists teach, and on and on and on. A quick anecdote. I was preparing for my very first formal public debate, which was to be in 1983. I knew a man from what was then called Oklahoma Christian College. He was literally a world-renowned scholar. He knew the Hebrew, he knew the Greek. Tremendous guy, and wonderful man, wonderful scholar. I called him up and asked if he would be willing to go to lunch with me and help me work through some things, and I particularly had Romans 11, 25 to 27 in mind. So we're at lunch. We discussed an awful lot of verses. He was very helpful in many ways. I came to Romans chapter 11, 25 to 27, and I said, "Man, I just got to have some help. I'm not understanding this text." And he let out a great big sigh. And he said, "Well, Don, all I can tell you on Romans 11, 25 to 27 is that you need to hope and pray that your opponent doesn't go there and camp out, because I don't have a clue what that passage teaches. I was stunned, literally stunned. Here's a world-class scholar. He could sight read the Hebrew. He could sight read the Greek. Journal articles. A genuine scholar. Yet here he was admitting he didn't have a clue what Romans 11, 25 to 27 was talking about. Now, I say all of that, ladies and gentlemen, to bring us to where I want to go for the rest of this week. I want you to consider with me that the coming of the Lord of Romans 11, 25 to 27 is in fact the coming of the Lord of Romans 11, 25 to 27. Now, I understand Matthew 25, 31 and following doesn't say all Israel shall be saved. But it's talking about the coming of the Lord. Now, I understand that there are scholars such as Kim Riddlebarger who says, well, the coming of the Lord in Romans chapter 11, 25 to 27, that's his incarnation. I won't go into the time to dispel and to refute that claim, but it's just simply false. So here we have the coming of the Lord of Matthew 25, 31 and following. When he would sit on the throne of his glory, the nations would be gathered before him, and he would judge and reward. Now, once again, I'm familiar with the fact Matthew 25, 31 and following doesn't speak about the salvation of all Israel. It doesn't quote from Old Testament passages like Romans 11 does. That doesn't prove they're not the same. Back to that negative fallacy. Point of fact is, Romans 11, the coming of the Lord for the judgment and the rewarding. Matthew chapter 25, pardon me, Matthew 25, 31 and following, coming of the Lord for the judgment and the rewarding. Romans chapter 11, coming of the Lord for the rewarding of Israel. Now, I want us to look this morning at Isaiah chapter 40 a little bit closer, because this is going to lay the groundwork for what are to me some of the most powerful correlations that one could possibly find. And all of these correlations prove definitively, I think, irrefutably, that Matthew chapter 25, 31 and following, and oh, by the way, the book of Revelation, was fulfilled in AD 70. Now, what does Isaiah chapter 40 say? Let me begin by reading just a few verses. Comfort, yes, comfort my people, says your God. Speak comfort to Jerusalem. Cry out to her that her warfare is ended, her iniquity is pardoned. Now, I just want to do an ever so slight sidebar here. This is the promise of the taking away of Israel's sin. Okay? This is one of the texts that Daniel 9, 24 and following is based upon. Many scholars have recognized that. Okay, so Isaiah 40, the promise of the taking away of Israel's sin. Daniel 9, the promise that in the 70 weeks, God would take away Israel's sin. And you cannot extend Daniel 9 beyond AD 70 and the destruction of Jerusalem. Well, that means you cannot take and apply Isaiah 40 beyond AD 70. If Isaiah 40 is predicting the coming of the Lord, as it is, we'll see momentarily, for the taking away of Israel's sin, then since Daniel 9 posits the taking away of Israel's sin within the confines, within the parameters of the 70 weeks, and the 70 weeks ended in AD 70, then in order to get either one of these passages applying to the future, you have to divorce them from Matthew 25. But let's continue, okay? That is such a rich connection that is, in many instances, overlooked. Okay, the voice of one crying in the wilderness, make straight in the desert a highway for our God. Every valley shall be exalted, every mountain brought low. The crooked places shall be made straight, and the rough places smooth. The glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together, for the mouth of the Lord has spoken. Okay, what do we have? The preparation of the voice in the wilderness, make straight in the highway, or the desert, a highway for our God. God was going to come, and the glory of the Lord would be manifested. Well, let's see. Matthew chapter 24, verse 30. They will see the Son of Man coming in power and great glory. 2 Thessalonians chapter 1. The coming of Christ in flaming fire to take vengeance against the persecutors. When would that be? In the day that he comes to be glorified in his saints. The constant theme linked with the parousia of Christ is the glorification of God. Here's Isaiah. And by the way, one of the incredible passages on this is Psalms 102 that predicted the destruction of, quote, heaven and earth. Oh, it would be at the time in which Zion would be glorified, the Lord would appear in glory, and that would be at the time, guess what? When a people that have yet to be created, a people yet to be created, that's from the psalmist's perspective, would be given a new name. Now look, folks, if you believe that Psalms 102 and Hebrews 1, which quotes it, is talking about the end of time, the coming of Christ to be glorified at the end of the age, end of the Christian age, then you got to ask yourself the question, is God going to destroy the church and create a new people with a new name at the end of the Christian age? Well, you've got to if you're going to apply Psalms and Hebrews to the end of time. But I digress. Once again, Isaiah chapter 40, the coming of the Lord to be glorified. But that coming of the Lord to be glorified would be heralded by the voice of one crying in the wilderness. Now ask yourself the question, who was the voice of one crying in the wilderness? Now remember, folks, this coming of the Lord of Isaiah 40 is the coming of the Lord to be glorified. Is that not Matthew chapter 25, 31 and following? If it's not, what is it? We know it wasn't Jesus' incarnation. Jesus' incarnation was not the time of his glorification. His glorification in Isaiah is the time of his coming in judgment, and that's Matthew chapter 25, 31 and following. And my goodness gracious, I'm almost out of time. Here's the deal. Isaiah 40 is the promise of the coming of the Lord to be manifested in glory, and that coming to be heralded by the voice of one crying in the wilderness. John the Baptizer was the voice of one crying in the wilderness. Right? You know he was. Mark chapter 1, verses 1 to 3, quotes from Isaiah 40 verbatim and applies it to John the Baptizer. That means that John the Baptizer was the voice to prepare for the coming of the Lord in glory and in judgment. of Matthew 25:31 and following. Not only that, but as we'll see tomorrow or the next day, that means that John the Baptizer was the voice of one to prepare for the coming of the Lord in glory, in judgment, and reward at the end of the millennium of Revelation chapter 20. Now look, I told you how perplexing Romans chapter 11 is, and it continues to be. I believe there are some definitive, powerful, and irrefutable pieces of evidence that point us to John the Baptizer as the key to understanding Romans 11:25-27. I wrote this book, Elijah Has Come, a solution to Romans 11:25-27. There is literally not another book like it anywhere. The evidence is comprehensive, it's vast, and it's powerful. Go to my website, donkpreston.com, BibleProphecy.com. Go to my store, order a copy of Elijah Has Come. Include a note that says you saw the offer on YouTube or Facebook, and I'll refund your shipping. These connections, folks, are absolutely astounding. Do yourself a favor, get a copy of the book. In the meantime, I'll see you on the flip side.